Welcome to Urban American Stories. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications.
The sound of the doorbell echoed through the Collins house in Fairhaven, Connecticut one fall morning. Emma Collins, 32, opened the door to find her brother Nathan, 35, with an expression she hadn't seen since their parents' funeral 3 months ago. "We need to talk," Nathan said, his voice shaking as he held up a crumpled envelope. "The house, it's not ours anymore." Emma felt the blood freeze in her veins. The two-story colonial house on Maple Street had been home to the Collins family for 3 generations. Her parents, Richard and Margaret Collins, had died in a car accident over the summer, leaving the property to their 2 sons in their will. "What do you mean it's not ours anymore?" Emma pulled her brother inside, closing the door behind him. The interior of the house still retained her mother's touches: the French lace curtains, the picture frames lined up on the staircase, the old pendulum clock that had been ticking away for decades. Nathan threw the envelope on the kitchen table, spreading out official documents. "Victoria Palmer," he spat out the name like it was poison. "That HOA, Shrew sold our house to a developer before the will was even executed." Victoria Palmer had been president of the Fairhaven Heights Homeowners Association for 5 years, known for her uncompromising stance and questionable methods. At 55, she ran the HOA like a small empire, imposing arbitrary fines and making residents' lives a living hell when contradicted. Emma examined the documents, her hands shaking. "This can't be legal. The will is still in the process of being validated." "That's exactly why I went to Mark Thompson," Nathan replied, referring to the private investigator he had hired. "He uncovered something much bigger than we imagined." Mark Thompson was a former Hartford police detective who now worked as a private investigator. At 48, he specialized in real estate fraud cases after seeing his own family lose their home in a similar scam years ago. Victoria forged property documents. Nathan continued pulling more papers from the envelope. "She took advantage of the period between our parents' death and the execution of the will to transfer the property to a shell company and then sold it to Riverside Development." Emma collapsed into the kitchen chair, the same place where she had last eaten breakfast with her parents. "Why would she do that? What does she get out of it?" "Money, power, revenge," Nathan listed. "Mart found out that we're not the only ones. There are at least 5 other properties in Fairhaven Heights that have been sold suspiciously in the last 2 years, all after the original owners passed away." Investigator Thompson had assembled a complete dossier on Victoria Palmer and her activities. The HOA president maintained connections with influential people in City Hall and the local real estate market, using her position to facilitate questionable transactions. "Riverside Development is planning to demolish this entire block," Nathan revealed, showing architectural plans that Mark had obtained. "They want to build a luxury apartment complex. Our house, the Richardsons' house, the Hendersons, they'll all turn to dust if we don't do something." Emma stood up, determination replacing her initial shock. "I'm not going to let that happen. This house means everything to our family. Every memory, every moment." "Mark is already gathering evidence for a lawsuit," Nathan explained. "But we need to act fast. The developer wants to start demolition in 60 days. The sound of the pendulum clock seemed louder now, as if to mark the urgency of the situation. Emma walked over to the kitchen window, looking out at the garden that her mother had cultivated so lovingly. The autumn roses still bloomed, stubbornly beautiful despite the tragedy that hung over the estate. "We're going to need a specialist lawyer," she said, turning to her brother. "Someone who isn't afraid to take on powerful people." "Mark recommended Rachel Montgomery," Nathan replied. "She has a history of cases against abusive HOAs. She's managed to bring down similar schemes in other districts." Rachel Montgomery was known in legal circles as the nightmare of HOAs. At 40, she built her reputation defending homeowners against associations that overstepped their authority. Her initial fee was high, but the Collins brothers knew they would need the best for this battle. "I'll set up a meeting with her for tomorrow," Nathan continued. "Mark will be there to present the evidence he's gathered." Emma nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. The Collins house wasn't just a property, it was the repository of memories from 3 generations, the place where her grandparents had raised her father, where she and Nathan had grown up, where so many family stories had unfolded. "Victoria Palmer doesn't know who she's messing with," Emma declared, her voice firm. I won't let her destroy our family legacy out of greed. Nathan put his hand on his sister's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that went back to their childhood. We'll fight together, as we always have. Father and Mother taught us never to give up on what's right. The pendulum clock sounded 4 times, as if to mark the start of a new battle. The Collins brothers were facing a fight that would go beyond a simple dispute over property. It was a war against corruption, greed, and the abuse of power that threatened not only their family heritage, but also the future of an entire community. As the fall sun began to set, casting long shadows through the windows of the colonial house, Emma and Nathan began to plan their strategy. Time was running out, and every minute would be precious in the battle to come. Victoria Palmer had chosen the wrong victims, and the Collins brothers were determined to expose her scheme, no matter the cost. The meeting with Rachel Montgomery took place on the 20th floor of a commercial building in Hartford. The office, with its glass walls and panoramic view of the city, reflected the success of the lawyer who had made her career bringing down corrupt HOAs. What Victoria Palmer is doing is more sophisticated than the usual abuse of power cases, Rachel explained, analyzing the documents spread out on her mahogany desk. Her shrewd eyes scrutinized every detail as Mark Thompson projected images onto the meeting room screen. Over the last 2 years, we've identified a pattern. Mark pointed to a digital map of Fairhaven Heights. 6 strategically positioned properties have been acquired under suspicious circumstances. All after the original owners had passed away, all before the inventory processes had been completed. Emma looked at the red dots on the map, forming a design that only now made sense. They're putting together a real estate puzzle, she murmured, realizing the larger plan. Exactly, Rachel confirmed. Riverside Development doesn't just want a few isolated houses. They need a contiguous block of properties to make the luxury complex project viable. Victoria is the key player in this scheme. Nathan leafed through a financial report that Mark had obtained. The transaction values are way below market. How come no one noticed this before? Because Victoria is clever, Mark replied, now projecting photos of clandestine meetings. She uses front companies for the initial purchases. Then she resells to Riverside at a significant profit. The money passes through various offshore accounts before returning to her. Rachel took a folder marked confidential from her drawer. I got this from an informant at City Hall. Victoria has a history of pressuring grieving families. She monitors local obituaries, identifies valuable properties, and acts at a time when families are most vulnerable. Emma felt nauseous thinking about how Victoria had calculated every move, waiting for the exact moment after her parents' death to execute her plan. She must have celebrated when she heard about the accident, she said bitterly. What worries me is the deadline, Rachel continued. Riverside has already obtained demolition permits. We need an urgent injunction to stop any action while we investigate further. Mark projected one last image, a recent photo of Victoria Palmer in a posh restaurant with a man in an expensive suit. This is Gregory Martinez, president of Riverside Development. They've been meeting regularly for the last few months, always in discreet locations outside the city. Can we prove the conspiracy? Nathan asked, leaning over the table. Rachel smiled for the first time since the meeting began. With what Mark has discovered, we can do more than that. We can expose the whole scheme and possibly put Victoria Palmer and her accomplices in prison for fraud, falsifying documents, and conspiracy. But we need to act fast, Mark warned. Victoria has powerful connections. As soon as they realize we're investigating, documents will start disappearing, witnesses will go silent. Emma thought of the other affected neighbors, the Richardsons, who had lost the house where they raised 3 generations of children, the Hendersons, forced to move after 40 years in the neighborhood. We need to warn them, she said. Together, we will be stronger. I agree, Rachel nodded. Collective action will have more impact. Mark, do you have contact with the other families? The investigator nodded. I can organize a discreet meeting. I know a safe place where we can talk without attracting attention. In the meantime, Rachel continued, I'll prepare the documents for the injunction. We have enough evidence to convince a judge to temporarily halt any demolition. Nathan picked up one of the photos of Victoria and Gregory. How can someone be so cruel, destroying homes, memories, lives? All for money. Greed makes people lose their humanity, Rachel replied, her voice carrying the weight of experience. I've seen it happen so many times. But I've also seen justice prevail when people come together to fight. Mark began to put away his equipment. I have a source inside Riverside Development. She mentioned an important meeting taking place tomorrow night. I could try to get more information about their next steps. Be careful, Emma urged. Victoria doesn't seem like the kind of person who would hesitate to use more aggressive methods if she found out she was being investigated. Rachel closed her laptop with determination. I'll file the injunction today. Emma Nathan, I need you to gather all the original documents from the house, all deeds, tax receipts, anything that proves the legitimacy of the Collins family's ownership. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the office windows, reminding everyone that time was precious. Somewhere in Fairhaven Heights, Victoria Palmer was probably in her own meeting planning the next steps in her criminal scheme. One last thing Rachel said as everyone stood up. From now on, we need to be extremely careful with our communications. Victoria has eyes and ears everywhere. Only use the secure numbers that Mark will provide and never discuss the case in public places. Emma and Nathan exchanged determined glances. The battle for the Collins house had only just begun, but now they had powerful allies on their side. Victoria Palmer had built her empire of lies, thinking that her victims would be too vulnerable to fight back. She was about to find out just how wrong she was. A week after her meeting with Rachel Montgomery, Emma found a brown envelope in her mailbox with no sender. Inside there were photos of her and Nathan leaving the lawyer's office, as well as a typed note, "Give up while you can." Emma immediately called Mark Thompson, who showed up within 15 minutes. The investigator examined the envelope with gloves, his expression grave, as he photographed each item. "Victoria is watching us," he confirmed, placing the evidence in plastic bags. "But that just proves she's getting nervous. Desperate people make mistakes." The meeting with the other affected families had been scheduled for that evening in the basement of the former bookshop of Gerald Henderson, one of the owners who lost his home to Victoria's scheme. The place, closed for months, offered the necessary discretion. At 7 in the evening, Emma and Nathan watched as the small space filled up. The Richardsons, an elderly couple who had lost the house where they raised 3 children. The Petersons forced to move after 25 years in the neighborhood. The widow Henderson still mourning her husband and the loss of the family property. Rachel Montgomery began the presentation, projecting documents onto the bare wall. "The pattern is clear," she explained. "Victoria monitors families at vulnerable times, especially after losses. She forges documents, taking advantage of the period between death and the execution of wills." "But how does she manage to register these transfers?" asked Martha Richardson, her voice shaking with indignation. Mark moved forward a few slides. "Victoria has an accomplice in the registry office," he revealed. "Michael Foster, an employee for 15 years. We discovered substantial deposits in his offshore accounts, coinciding with each fraudulent transfer." The revelation caused a stir in the room. Michael Foster was well known in the community, took part in charity events, had a seemingly impeccable reputation. "This goes beyond Riverside Development," Nathan added. "It's a network of corruption that stretches across several institutions in the city." Rachel handed out folders of legal documents. "I prepared a class action. With all the families united, we have a much stronger case. Each individual story contributes to exposing the criminal pattern." Emma noticed tears in Mrs. Henderson's eyes as she flipped through the documents. "Gerald always said that something was wrong in the HOA. He tried to alert other residents, but no one believed him. Victoria made sure he was seen as a paranoid conspirator," Mark commented. "It's part of her tactic to discredit anyone who raises suspicions." A noise upstairs made everyone freeze. Mark quietly went upstairs, returning a few moments later. "All clear, but we need to be more cautious. Victoria has eyes everywhere." Rachel continued the meeting, detailing the legal strategy. The lawsuit would be filed simultaneously with complaints to the FBI and the state attorney's office. "We need to attack on all fronts," she explained. "If one path is blocked, we'll have alternatives." Nathan shared his own discovery. "I found records that Victoria tried this same scheme in other cities. She always uses different names for the front companies, but the method is identical." "Why hasn't anyone stopped her before?" asked John Peterson, his voice laced with frustration. "Because she chooses her victims carefully," Mark replied. "Grieving people, the elderly, vulnerable families. And when someone tries to fight back, she uses her influence to crush resistance. Emma thought of her parents, how devastated they would be to see their home threatened. This time she's chosen the wrong victims, she declared with determination. Rachel presented a detailed timetable. We have 2 weeks until the first hearing for the injunction. We need consistent testimony, impeccable documentation, and irrefutable evidence. Mark projected new surveillance photos. Victoria has a meeting scheduled with Gregory Martinez tomorrow. I managed to plant a listening device in the restaurant. It could be our chance to catch them discussing the scheme openly. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, each family sharing details that helped piece together the puzzle of the conspiracy. By the time they had finished, Rachel had a stack of signed statements, and Mark had collected dozens of original documents for analysis. They left in small groups at different intervals, so as not to attract attention. Emma was the last to leave along with Nathan and Mark. When they reached the parking lot, they noticed an unfamiliar car standing on the corner. "Don't look directly," Mark instructed, leading them along an alternative route. "Probably one of Victoria's informants. I'll run the license plate tomorrow." At home, Emma couldn't sleep. She flipped through old family albums, finding photos of 3 generations of Collins on the porch of a colonial house. Each picture was a reminder of what was at stake. Her phone vibrated with a message from Rachel. "Emergency meeting tomorrow 9 a.m. New developments." Nathan called a few minutes later. "Mark's got something big. We can't talk on the phone, but he said it could be the turning point we need." Emma looked out of the window, watching the city lights. Somewhere out there, Victoria Palmer was probably planning her next move. But for the first time since they discovered the scheme, Emma felt they had a real chance of winning. The clock struck 3 in the morning when she finally got to sleep, lulled by the certainty that the battle had only just begun. Victoria Palmer had built her empire through fear and manipulation, but she hadn't counted on the strength that ordinary people could have when they united for a just cause. The recording of the conversation between Victoria Palmer and Gregory Martinez arrived in Rachel Montgomery's hands the following morning, sent by Mark via a trusted courier. The lawyer called an emergency meeting in her office where Emma and Nathan listened in horror to the content of the conversation. "The scheme is bigger than we imagined," Rachel said, pausing the recording. "Victoria isn't just stealing houses, she's laundering money for an international criminal organization through these real estate transactions." In the recording, Victoria and Gregory openly discussed cleaning up millions of dollars through the fraudulent sales. Each stolen property served as a vehicle to legitimize dirty money, with Riverside Development acting as a front for a sophisticated money laundering operation. "That explains why they specifically need these properties," Mark commented, pointing to the map of Fairhaven Heights on his tablet. "The luxury complex was never the real goal. It's just an excuse to move large amounts of money around." Emma felt a chill as she realized the true extent of the conspiracy. "That's why Victoria has so much political protection," she muttered. "How many people are involved in this?" "Many," Rachel replied, pulling a new folder from her file. "I got a warrant to access Victoria's bank records. In the last 3 years, she has moved more than $50 million through different front companies." Nathan studied the documents carefully. "But that also means we have more ammunition against her. Money laundering is a federal crime." "Exactly," Rachel smiled. "I've already been in touch with an FBI agent who works with financial crimes. They're particularly interested in the international aspect of the scheme." Mark projected a series of photos onto the wall. "Victoria has connections to criminal organizations in at least 3 countries. She's not just a corrupt HOA president, she's a high-level operative in an international organized crime network." The meeting was interrupted by an urgent call. It was Martha Richardson, her voice trembling with fear. "There are strange people breaking into my house. They say they have an eviction notice." Rachel immediately picked up her phone, dialing the judge who had issued the temporary injunction. Mark was already on his way to the Richardsons' house, while Emma and Nathan followed in another car. When they arrived, they found 2 burly men trying to force their way in while 75-year-old Martha stood bravely at the door. Mark identified himself as a licensed investigator, filming the whole scene with a cell phone. "The eviction order is false," Rachel declared, arriving minutes later with the police. "I have a court injunction prohibiting any action against these properties until the case is concluded." The men backed off, but not before leaving a veiled warning. "Mrs. Palmer sends her regards. One of them muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. That evening, the group met at the Collins house to reorganize their strategy. The attempt to intimidate Martha Richardson had crossed a dangerous line. Victoria is desperate, Mark analyzed, reviewing the new evidence. She knows we're close to exposing the whole scheme. Desperate people make mistakes. Rachel agreed. The hearing for the permanent injunction is in 3 days. With this new evidence, not only will we ensure the protection of the properties, but we can also ask for Victoria's pretrial detention for attempting to circumvent a court order. Emma watched the garden through the window, thinking how proud her parents would be to see their children fighting not just for the family home, but for the whole community. We need to protect the other residents, she said. Victoria might try more intimidation. I've already thought of that, Mark replied. I've set up a discreet security team to monitor all the properties involved in the process. And I've installed surveillance cameras at strategic points. Nathan studied the latest documents discovered by Rachel. There's something here about a Riverside Development Board meeting tomorrow. It looks important. It's our chance, Rachel declared. With the FBI monitoring and the evidence we have, we can catch everyone involved at once. But we need to be extremely careful. One false move, and Victoria could destroy crucial evidence. The group worked late into the night, refining every detail of the plan. Emma realized that they were close to a resolution, but she also knew that these would be the most dangerous days of the entire battle. Victoria Palmer had a lot to lose, and people like that rarely go down without a fight. Remember, Rachel warned before leaving. From now on, our every move needs to be perfect. Victoria has resources, connections, and nothing to lose. She'll play dirty. Emma and Nathan exchanged determined glances. The Collins house had been more than a home. It was a symbol of resistance against corruption and greed. And now it was about to become the center of a battle that could expose one of the biggest criminal schemes Fairhaven Heights had ever seen. The morning of the Riverside Development Board meeting dawned with a palpable tension in the air. Emma and Nathan watched from a discreet car as executives in expensive suits entered the glass and steel building in Hartford's financial center. Victoria Palmer arrived punctually at 9 a.m., her confident demeanor masking the pressure she faced. What Victoria didn't know was that her every move was being monitored. Undercover FBI agents occupied strategic positions around the building, while Mark Thompson coordinated the surveillance operation from a van parked nearby. All targets are in place. Mark's voice crackled on Rachel Montgomery's communicator, who was waiting with a team of federal agents in the lobby. Gregory Martinez just arrived with 3 foreign executives. They're the same ones we identified in the international transactions. Emma felt her heart race as Rachel gave the signal. In a matter of minutes, federal agents burst into the meeting room on the 15th floor. Victoria Palmer was caught literally with incriminating documents in her hands, detailed blueprints for more fraudulent acquisitions and records of international transfers. Victoria Palmer announced Special Agent Daniel Roberts, "You are under arrest for real estate fraud, money laundering, and participation in an international criminal organization." The look of shock on Victoria's face as the handcuffs closed on her wrists was only the beginning. Gregory Martinez tried to escape down the emergency staircase only to find another team of agents waiting. In less than an hour, the entire board of Riverside Development was in federal custody. In the surveillance van, Emma, Nathan, and Mark watched the arrest through the monitors. "It's over," Nathan whispered, holding his sister's hand. But Emma knew there was still work to be done. In the following weeks, the extent of Victoria's criminal scheme was revealed in shocking detail. The investigation discovered that she had used her position in the HOA to facilitate money laundering operations that stretched from Canada to the Cayman Islands. The luxury apartment complex was just another front for legitimizing millions in illicit money. Rachel Montgomery worked tirelessly to ensure that all the properties were returned to their rightful owners. In an emotional hearing, federal judge William Harrison annulled all the fraudulent transfers and ordered full restitution to the affected families. This case, declared Judge Harrison, represents not only a victory against corruption, but a testament to the power of the community standing together against injustice. Mrs. Henderson was able to return to the house where she lived with her late husband. The Richardsons regained the property that had housed generations of their family, and the Collins house remained a symbol of resistance and hope. But the story didn't end there. Emma and Nathan, transformed by their experience, decided to use their victory to help others. With Rachel Montgomery, they established a foundation to help victims of real estate fraud and abuse by HOAs. Our parents always taught us that justice takes more than words, it takes action, Emma explained during the inauguration of the Collins Foundation for Housing Justice. Every family deserves the right to protect their home, their memories, their legacy. Victoria Palmer was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Gregory Martinez and other Riverside Development executives faced similar sentences. Michael Foster, the corrupt notary public, accepted a plea bargain, exposing even more ramifications of the scheme. One fall afternoon a year after a battle began, Emma was in the garden of the Collins home, tending to the roses her mother loved so much. Nathan arrived with news of the latest hearing. The judge has approved the compensation, he announced. All the families will receive compensation for moral and material damages. And even better, the old HOA headquarters will be transformed into a community center. Emma smiled, watching the golden leaves fall in the garden. Mom and Dad would be proud, she said. Not only did we save our house, but we helped rebuild our community. The pendulum clock inside the house chimed 5 times, its familiar sound now carrying new meaning. Each strike represented not just time passed, but memories preserved, justice achieved, lives rebuilt. Mark Thompson, who had become a close friend of the family, appeared to share one last report. The international network has been completely dismantled, he reported. The Collins Palmer case is being used as a model for similar investigations across the country. Rachel Montgomery, at the end of the last proceedings related to the case, reflected on the journey. Sometimes the greatest acts of justice begin with ordinary people who simply refuse to give up on what is right. The colonial house on Maple Street stood as it always had, its walls now holding not only the memories of 3 generations of Collins, but also the story of a battle that transformed an entire community. The French lace curtains still filtered the sunlight, the picture frames still told silent stories on the staircase, and the pendulum clock continued to mark time, no longer with urgency, but with the quiet certainty that justice, though sometimes slow, always finds its way. Emma and Nathan Collins had entered this battle to save their family home. They ended up saving much more than that. They saved a legacy of justice that would continue to inspire generations to come.